I'm 82 years old now, and I spend most of my days sitting in a quiet house that used to feel too small for all of us. It's strange how a place can shrink when it's full of people, and then somehow feel too large once they're gone. I used to think silence was something I earned. Now I understand it's something that settles in when there's no one left to interrupt it. I wasn't always like this. Or maybe I was, and I just didn't notice. When you're younger, you don't think of your life as something that can be lost in pieces. You think of it as something you're building, brick by brick, promotion by promotion. You wake up early, stay late, and convince yourself that all of it is necessary, that it means something. I believed that. I believed it completely. In my 30s, I worked in an office that smelled faintly of paper and stale coffee. The lights were always a little too bright. I used to arrive before most people, sit at my desk, and go through the same routine every morning. Numbers, meetings, calls. There was always another target, another deadline. I liked the feeling of being needed, of being the one people relied on. At home, things were simpler. My wife would ask how my day was, and I'd say, busy. That was usually enough to end the conversation. Not because she didn't care, but because I didn't give her much to work with. We had 2 children. I remember their faces more than their voices now, which feels wrong. A father should remember the sound of his children, shouldn't he? The way they laughed, the way they called for him. I was there, technically. I came home most nights. I sat at the dinner table, but my mind was somewhere else. I was already thinking about the next morning, the next meeting, the next step forward. I used to tell myself I was doing it for them. That's the sentence I repeated whenever something didn't feel right. When I missed a school play, when I forgot a birthday until the last minute, when my wife stopped asking if I'd be home early. I'm doing this for them. It sounds reasonable when you say it out loud. It sounds responsible. Necessary, even. But it has a way of becoming an excuse. There wasn't a single moment where everything changed. That's the thing people don't tell you. Loss doesn't always arrive with a loud crash. Sometimes it slips in quietly, over years, while you're busy looking in another direction. My son used to wait for me by the window. I remember that clearly. I'd pull into the driveway and he'd already be there, watching. That stopped at some point. I don't remember when. One day he was there, and then one day he wasn't. I didn't think much of it at the time. Children grow up. They find their own interests. That's what I told myself. My daughter used to sit next to me on the couch and tell me about her day. Little things. Friends, school, things that seemed small. I'd nod, half listening, sometimes checking my watch or thinking about a call I needed to make. Eventually, she stopped sitting next to me. Again, I told myself it was normal. You see how it works. You explain things away because the alternative is uncomfortable. It requires you to look at yourself more closely than you'd like. There were evenings when my wife would sit across from me, quiet, her hands folded in her lap. I'd ask if something was wrong, and she'd say, "No, just tired." I believed her. Or maybe I chose to. Looking back, I think she was waiting for me to notice something I never did. In my 40s, things improved professionally. Bigger office, better salary. More recognition. People started using words like success when they talked about me. I wore that word like a badge. I remember the day I got a promotion I'd been chasing for years. I stayed late at the office, celebrating with a few colleagues. When I finally got home, the house was dark. Everyone was asleep. There was a note on the kitchen table. My wife had written, "We waited, but it got late. Dinner's in the fridge." I stood there for a while, reading that note. I don't know what I felt exactly. Not guilt, not really. More like a brief discomfort that I pushed aside. I heated up the food, ate alone, and went to bed. The next morning, I told them about the promotion. They smiled. They said they were happy for me. And they were. I don't doubt that. But something in that moment felt distant, like I was telling them about someone else's life. Still, I kept going. There's a kind of momentum that builds when you live like that. You don't stop to question it because everything seems to be moving in the right direction, at least on the surface. Years passed. My children grew older. My son started spending more time out of the house. My daughter became quieter, more reserved. I told myself it was part of growing up. My wife and I spoke less. Not out of anger. There were no big arguments, no dramatic scenes, just fewer conversations, shorter ones. We became efficient with each other. Did you pay the bill? Yes. Will you be home late? Probably. That sort of thing. It didn't feel like a problem. It felt like life settling into a routine. I thought that was what stability looked like. The first real moment I can point to, the one that should have shaken me, came later than it should have. My son graduated from university. I remember sitting in the audience, watching him walk across the stage. People around me were clapping, cheering. I clapped too. But as I watched him, I realized I didn't know him very well. Not really. I knew what he studied, I knew where he lived. But I didn't know what he thought about things, what worried him, what made him happy. There was a distance there, and it wasn't new. It had been building for years. I just hadn't paid attention. After the ceremony, we took pictures. Smiles, handshakes, polite conversations. It all looked right from the outside. But I remember standing next to him thinking, when did this happen? And not having an answer. My daughter moved away a few years later. She hugged me before she left, held on a little longer than usual. I remember that. I patted her back, told her to take care of herself. I didn't say much else. There are things you assume you'll have time to say later. That's another quiet mistake. My wife and I stayed in the same house, but by then, it felt different. Too quiet, even before it actually was. We had evenings where we sat in separate rooms. Not because we argued, we just didn't come together. I think she had stopped expecting me to. One night she said, "Do you ever feel like we missed something?" I didn't understand the question at first. "Missed what?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know, just something." I told her we had a good life, that we'd done well, provided for the kids, built something stable. She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. That conversation ended there. It stayed with me, though. Not enough to change anything, but enough to linger in the back of my mind. The moment of no return came quietly, like most things in my life. She got sick. It wasn't sudden. There were appointments, tests, long waits in hospital corridors. At first, we both believed it would pass, that it was something manageable. But it wasn't. I remember sitting beside her hospital bed one afternoon. The room was filled with that sterile smell, machines humming softly in the background. She looked smaller somehow, frailer. We talked more in those weeks than we had in years. Not about big things, just small memories. The kids when they were young, places we'd been, moments I had half forgotten. At one point she said, "I used to wait for you to come home early." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. She wasn't accusing me. That's what made it harder. There was no anger in her voice, just a simple statement, a truth. When she passed, the house changed overnight. Not physically, everything was still where it had always been, but the feeling of it shifted. I walked through the rooms, noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way she arranged the kitchen, the books she kept by the bed, the small notes she'd leave for herself. All the quiet details of a life I hadn't fully seen. My children came for the funeral. We stood together, but it felt like we were connected more by circumstance than closeness. They had their own lives by then, their own routines. I was part of their history, not their present. After they left, the silence settled in. That's when everything became clear. Not all at once, but gradually, like pieces of a picture coming together too late to change it. I started remembering things differently. Not just what happened, but what I missed while it was happening. The evenings I stayed late at work instead of coming home. The conversations I cut short because I was tired. The moments that seemed small at the time but were probably everything. You can't go back and live those again. That's the part people don't like to think about. There's no catching up on years you didn't fully live. Now, I sit here, and I think about what I have left. Not much, if I'm being honest. A few photographs, occasional phone calls, memories that feel incomplete. I achieved what I set out to achieve. I built a career, earned respect, provided for my family. But when I measure my life now, those things don't carry the weight I thought they would. What stays with me are the absences, the conversations we didn't have, the time I assumed would always be there. If you're listening to this, I'm not going to tell you what to do. That wouldn't mean much coming from me. I could only tell you what I didn't understand when I had the chance. I thought there would always be another evening, another weekend, another opportunity to sit down and really be there. I thought people would wait. They don't. Life keeps moving, quietly, steadily. And if you're not paying attention, it moves past you in ways you can't undo. I used to think success would feel different at this age. Fuller, warmer. It doesn't. It feels distant, like something that belonged to someone else. What feels real are the empty chairs, the quiet rooms, the things I would say now if there were still someone here to hear them. I don't expect anything to change at this point. I've made my peace with that, in my own way. But I do find myself wishing, not for a different life exactly, but for a different attention to the life I had. There's a difference. If you have people in your life who still sit across from you at the table, who still wait for you to come home, who still try to tell you about their day, just notice that. That's all. I didn't. And now, at 82, I sit in a house that finally has all the space I once thought I needed, with more time than I know what to do with. It's a quiet way to understand what mattered. And it's a quiet way to live with the fact that I understood it too late.